One of the great things about writing alternate realities is that you're not confined to our reality to tell a story. So you can kind of break down the walls and the limitations that you would normally encounter when you're telling a story with our characters in our world. And you can take them places that they would never go, because in alternate realities, they're not necessarily the same people that they are that we know and love. Course Oblivion was its ties to the Twilight Zone, and one of the inspirations for Course Oblivion was the episode The After Hours with Anne Francis. And in that episode, we see this normal woman walk into a department store and then realize that she's not a normal woman at all. She's in fact a mannequin who gets a day pass to go out and be a normal person. And in these alternate reality episodes and in the concept of alternate realities, you have to ask the question, how normal are we?
That wasn't B'Elanna. It was a duplicate.
We are all duplicates. None of us are real.
Since alternate realities have so much to do with identity and our perceptions of ourself, that frequently in those alternate universe episodes or those parallel universe episodes, we get to meet characters who are ourselves but who are not ourselves. It's like the path that we didn't take that we could have taken if circumstances in our lives would have been different.
The Silver Blood. It sampled our DNA and created duplicates of the entire crew.
I've often wondered what happened to them. Are they flourishing? Have they continued to evolve?
Do they still resemble us?
Course Oblivion started with the original episode. It was a sequel to episode that we did the season prior called Demon Planet. And the Demon class planet was an inhospitable planet that we went down to explore, and we would encounter this mimetic fluid that would duplicate our crew. And when we first started talking about the idea of this mimetic element that we would encounter, we had a much more aggressive horror movie inclination for the story. We were going to have these mimetic people spitting like biomimetic fluid on people's faces, and they would fall to the ground and writhe, and then they would be duplicated, and it was much more Invasion of the Body Snatchers than it became something a little more thought-provoking and a little less horror movie-oriented, and became much more science fiction, and did what I think Star Trek does really best, which is explore the nature of human beings.
If everything about us was duplicated, that includes our memory engrams, the emotional centers of our brain. So if you feel something, remember something, believe something, I'm not about to tell you it's not real.
I wrote this episode with Nick Sagan, who is son of Carl Sagan and the voice of the Voyager probe welcoming all aliens to Earth, which hopefully they've arrived. And so it was a fun collaboration with Nick, and it was a story that we had developed from the original episode Demon Planet. And we kind of rolled up our sleeves and we wrote in the room together, and we wrote separately, and it was a pretty great experience.
We assumed their lives and set a course for Earth.
Duplicates or not, you're still my crew.
There was little clues that we wove into the storytelling where Lieutenant Tom Paris, who had a demotion and was now Ensign Tom Paris, we got to see, or the careful viewer would get to see those clues and know that something is slightly off about this world, and not just to do with the rice that falls through the deck plating. It has to do with these characters are familiar, and they're characters that we've grown to love, but something is slightly off about them, and it sets us off and gets us in a slightly paranoid, a sense of paranoia that creeps into the world, where we're wondering, what's the next twist? If this is the first inkling that something is off in the world, what's going to be the next? One of the funnest things about Course Oblivion was the makeup effects that we got to put the cast through when they were melting, and it was something that was very subtle and simple, and Michael Westmore did a fantastic job. And this episode, it's always really funny when you work on a show and you look for those episodes that are going to be get well episodes, where you're like, okay, we're going to film this all on standing sets, we don't have to build anything new, we don't have a large cast, we're using all of our regulars. And then we tend to to have so much fun with the details that those bottle shows, as we call them, never end up being as cost-saving as we want them to be when we set out. So the makeup effects turned out to be kind of expensive, and there was a lot of them.
Timeless was the 100th episode of Star Trek Voyager, thus making it the third Star Trek show to surpass Star Trek the original series in the number of episodes made.
It was a big celebration for the crew and the cast and the writers because we had. It's a huge landmark to actually have 100 episodes in the canon. It's a benchmark that a lot of shows don't get to. So there was quite a big celebration on the set. We had a huge cake. We had the entire cast was there. Writers from past and present, cast members that had come and gone, all came down to tip their hat to the 100th episode of Voyager, and I think it was one of our best episodes. It hit on all cylinders, and it's. In relation to alternate universes and parallel realities, it is one of those stories where we get to act on our regrets and we get to go back and do something over, and that's something I think that is a fantasy of everybody when we've made a mistake, especially a costly mistake that has killed hundreds of people, that we want the opportunity to go back and fix it.
Timeless is one of those episodes that presents the age-old problem in a time-bending manner. If we have the opportunity to change reality, to change time, do we take it?
You made it. All the way back to Earth. We got home, Doc. And all it took was killing everyone we cared about.
Harry.
It was very exciting. You know, that episode really started with an image. We were all in the break room. We were talking with Joe Menosky and Brandon Braga, and the central image of that show was Voyager crashing in the ice and sinking and finding the crew frozen decades later.
It was challenging, but I was so excited. I was so excited about that episode because it was something where Brandon had called me up and said, "Listen, I've written the 100th episode. We were going to make it a two-parter. But I've made it a single episode because I want it to stand alone. I want this episode to be Voyager's City on the Edge of Forever."
Yes!
My favorite things about alternate realities and the science behind parallel realities and string theories and multiverses is that they can't be proven, so they can't be disproven.
Twilight is a show about an alternate future, a dark future that shows what could happen if the crew doesn't succeed in this mission that they're sent on at the beginning of our season 3. I think it helped establish the jeopardy and what these bad guys that we were now fighting, the Xindi, in this year-long, season-long arc we were doing, by showing the stakes, by showing that these guys really were out to wipe out humanity and wipe out the planet and just see it. Twilight began as a pitch for Voyager that it was called November 12th, which is my mother's birthday, and the idea being that Janeway, every day she woke up, she was reliving the same day, November 12th, and she was afflicted with, a form of these, interspatial parasites that were affecting her memory. She couldn't form any new long-term memories. So, just as in Twilight, we start the story early on. Chakotay has taken over the ship, and she's sort of like this, this Alzheimer's patient who's not really in command anymore. She knows everyone. Time is really passing for them, but mentally it's not passing for her. And like Twilight, it ends up many years in the future where Chakotay is her caretaker, and at some later point they figure out how to destroy the parasites, which wipes them out not only because they are outside of space-time, the parasites are destroyed in all times. So essentially the timeline is reset and she wakes up and it's the first November 12th and all is well. It stuck in my mind, and when the third season of Enterprise came around, I knew I wanted to do sort of a tragic love story and a story about unrequited love, which to me are always that's always the most touching. In this case, it was T'Pol, who was growing attached to Archer after spending all these years living with him, but for him, no time was really passing at all. I mean, he was aging, he was going gray, but mentally, he was the same person he was when he was first infected. And she was not changing in his mind either. So even though they were living together and spending all this time together, she was gradually falling in love with him, but he was not.
I can only imagine what it must have been like. Spending all those years in that house, learning so much about him, yet he remembers nothing about you. Beyond the day he became ill.
To me, it was fascinating to find sort of a sci-fi analogy for Alzheimer's, because in some way, if you think about it, as I thought about it, Alzheimer's is kind of a metaphor for time travel, in that, you know, you wake up in 2009, but mentally you're in 1955. And who are all these strange people? And, you know, where's my wife? What's going on here? The one thing, if there was one thing I could do different, at the time when I wrote it, I was adamant that nobody would remember anything, that this was an alternate future, an alternate reality that had not happened. There was really no time travel involved. So once it was erased, why would Archer, why would anybody remember it? But I think it robbed the show of a little bit of a poignancy that it could have had at the end, that it doesn't quite have for me, that if he just had an inkling of something, of this future where he and T'Pol shared something, I think it would have made the ending a little more effective. And I wish at the time I'd realized it, but...
You know, you'd make a wonderful nurse.
E Squared is, I think, another one of those Star Trek stories about a future that could possibly be, but that our characters are desperately trying to, make sure it doesn't happen. It was based on a pitch I had for Voyager that I was calling Crossroads, and that idea was that, Voyager was on this, 7-year mission to get home and flying on its way back to Earth. And I thought, well, what if they ran into another Voyager coming the other way? And what would that be about? Again, it was about the sort of alternate Voyager from the future where the crew had tried to get home, but there were just too many obstacles, too many enemies, and they just decided to essentially head back to the Delta Quadrant and settle. And so they meet their own descendants, and it was, if I remember, a story about B'Elanna meeting her daughter, who is now the chief engineer on this other Voyager. And it's kind of ironic in that, the original pitch was about the character of B'Elanna, who was played by Roxanne, who later directed the Enterprise version of that same story. Roxanne is great in that she can do all the great space adventure, the battles, make all of that exciting. But I think she knows at its heart, this is really a story about the characters, and you've got to get those relationships to work. There's some very poignant scenes where Archer meets old T'Pol, who's like 160 or something like that. Roxanne did a wonderful job with those scenes, I thought, as well.
They didn't tell me you were still aboard.
You mean still alive?
My favorite moment in the script, and there was a time when the episode was running over, we needed to cut some stuff out, and a scene that I fought to keep in, and it's still in the episode, is the moment where Reed sits down with Hoshi and Mayweather, and everyone's talking about, well, who did you get married to on the other ship? Who's your what? Do you have kids? What's going on? And Reed just kind of looks uncomfortable, and we find out that he never did get married.
Did you get married, have kids?
No. Actually, I didn't.
And he really seemed bummed about it, like this was his fate. And for me, the fun moment is the very end of that scene. He sees this pretty girl walk into the mess hall, and instead of just sitting there by himself and eating his meal in silence, he makes an effort to go over to her and say hello, realizing that he's got to change his ways unless he wants to become a lifelong bachelor. So for me, that was a fun little character moment.
The seat's available.